Throughout the day, Russian forces shelled settlements in the Dnipropetrovsk region using drones and artillery. According to the military administration, an elderly woman, a resident of the Nikopol district, was wounded. Civilian infrastructure was damaged, including dozens of private homes and vehicles. In addition, near Kryvyi Rih, the Russians set fire to a gas station. 2 people were injured as a result of a strike by Russian occupiers on an enterprise near Kremenchuk in the Poltava region. According to local authorities, the victims have already received medical assistance. All relevant services are working at the site of the attack, and essential infrastructure for the population is operating as usual. Last night, Ukraine was once again subjected to a massive combined attack by the Russian Federation Army. The air raid siren sounded in all regions, and nearly 700 targets were detected in the country's airspace. Russian drones attacked critical infrastructure facilities in the Chernihiv region. For the strike, the Russian occupiers used more than 10 Geran drones, according to the regional military administration. As a result of the air attack, a vehicle fleet was damaged. Enterprises in Priluki, as well as a farmer's warehouse in one of the villages of the Chernihiv region. In Chernihiv itself, as a result of a drone strike, a critical infrastructure facility was damaged and part of the city was left without power. And in the Khmelnytsky region, a person was killed due to an attack by the Russian army. This was reported by the head of the regional military administration, Serhiy Turin. Power outages were also reported due to the shelling. By evening, power had been restored to 170,000 families by utility workers. The Odessa region was also targeted by the Russian Federation's army. As a result of the attack, more than 100 homes and a civilian cargo ship were damaged. This was reported by the head of the regional military administration, Ole Kipper. According to him, energy, port, and residential infrastructure facilities were damaged. In one district of the city, the roof of a residential building caught fire. In another, windows were shattered and the roofs of private homes were destroyed. As a result of the massive Russian strike, 5 people were injured in the capital of Ukraine. 3 of them were hospitalized, according to the mayor of Kyiv. In the Kyiv region, 1 person was killed and 2 others were injured. The strikes targeted energy and civilian infrastructure. More details about the consequences of the Russian shelling are coming up in the report.
According to eyewitnesses, this 5-story building was hit by a Russian Shahed-type kamikaze drone. A direct hit. The roof is completely destroyed. A huge hole has formed in the building. The blast wave blew out windows and balconies. Rescuers were pulling people out of blocked apartments. According to the head of the Kyiv City Military Administration, there are injured people. Among them is a child.
I live on the 6th floor, and when the drone started buzzing, I wanted to look out the window and saw a black Shahed. And at that moment, there was an explosion. Black smoke started rising, and there was a strong pinkish fire. My acquaintances on the 3rd floor were injured. Right now, they're processing all of this.
Many of those affected after the Russian strike are complaining of severe stress. One Kyiv resident said that after the explosion of the Russian drone, her dog started to panic. The animal was trembling and couldn't find a place for itself.
I was standing in the kitchen, brewing coffee. At that moment, there was a big explosion and I got scared. Now I ran into the room because of the dog. I believe she's trembling too, coming to me and hiding under the bed. And my friends were affected in this building. And friends were also affected in this 9-story building. My girlfriend lives there and my friends live there too. They were affected. Their windows were blown out and everyone is still talking to them.
As usual, under the pretense of targeting military facilities, the aggressor country's army is shelling civilian infrastructure. The Kyiv authorities have set up an aid tent at the site. Victims are coming here for help. Employees of the State Emergency Service, rescuers, medical staff, and psychologists are working here. All those affected are receiving the necessary assistance.
At the moment, we are at the site where the enemy UAV fell. We are currently working at the site of the enemy drone crash. At the scene, the police have set up a command tent where investigators are now taking statements from affected citizens whose property was damaged. Also on site are ambulance crews, forensic experts inspecting the premises, and the bomb disposal unit.
President Volodymyr Zelensky reported that not only Kyiv, but at least 13 regions of Ukraine came under heavy overnight shelling. In the Kyiv region, a private 2-story house burned down. Inside was a woman born in 1949. She died. The aggressor country's army also attacked the Zhytomyr region with missiles and drones. A child was killed there. There are also injured, according to the head of the regional military administration. In total, the Russian side launched more than 650 UAVs and over 30 missiles to shell Ukrainian cities, President Volodymyr Zelensky reported. He specifically emphasized that the strikes targeted the country's energy infrastructure. Emergency power outages have been introduced in several regions.
I would like to note that Poland once again scrambled its air force in response to the massive attack by the Russian Federation on Ukraine. According to the operational command of the Polish armed forces, in addition to the deployment of fighter jets, ground-based air defense systems were also placed on high alert. Russian forces once again launched a massive strike on Ukraine, in fact right in the midst of negotiations to end the war. The strike came just before Christmas, when people want to be at home with their loved ones in safety. Thus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded to yet another act of terror by the Russians.
This Russian strike sends an extremely clear signal about Russia's priorities. The strike came right in the midst of negotiations aimed at ending this war. Putin simply cannot accept that he needs to stop killing. And this means that the world is not putting enough pressure on Russia. Now it is necessary to respond to push Russia towards peace and guaranteed security. We must not forget that every day, both on weekdays and holidays, Ukraine is defending people's lives. Air defense for Ukraine, funding for weapons procurement and deliveries of energy equipment. All of these are processes that do not take weekends off. We must remain committed to protecting life in order to finally achieve peace. Thank you to everyone who helps Ukraine. Thank you to every leader, every politician who today will not remain silent and will condemn Russia for what it has done. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Due to the massive Russian attack, Ukrainian nuclear power plants were forced to reduce their output. The Ministry of Energy clarified that consumers in the Rivne, Ternopil and Khmelnytsky regions were almost completely left without power. There are also problems with electricity supply in the Vinnytsia, Chernihiv, Zhytomyr, Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkiv regions.
Emergency repair work will begin as soon as the security situation allows. In the Odessa region, efforts to eliminate the consequences of several consecutive massive strikes on the region's energy infrastructure are ongoing. A significant number of consumers remain without electricity. Due to the massive missile and drone attack on the energy system across Ukraine, emergency power outage schedules are currently being implemented.
In total, the aggressor country's army launched 673 aerial weapons at Ukraine. The attacks were repelled by aviation, anti-aircraft missile troops, electronic warfare and drone units, as well as mobile fire groups. The defense forces of Ukraine. The command of the Ukrainian Air Force demonstrated video footage of air defense combat operations. 34 out of 38 missiles were shot down, including Kinzhal, Iskander, and Kh-101 missiles. Ukrainian air defenders also managed to neutralize 587 Russian drones launched against Ukraine. The Security Service of Ukraine struck a Russian Il-38 November Sea Dragon maritime reconnaissance aircraft. Its estimated value is $24 million. A drone equipped with a warhead containing 2,000 striking elements was used for the attack. As a result, key equipment and one of the aircraft's engines were damaged. The Russians had only one aircraft of this class in the Black Sea. It was capable of detecting Ukrainian Sea Baby underwater drones. These drones were recently used to strike a Varshavyanka-class submarine in Novorossiysk. It was precisely the disabling of the Russian reconnaissance aircraft that made the successful strike on the submarine possible. Since the beginning of the day, there have already been 67 combat clashes on the front line, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Russian troops continue to be most active in storming the Pokrovsk direction. More details about the situation at the front are coming up next.
Drone operators from the border unit Strix eliminated at least 18 Russian occupiers in the southern Slobozansky direction. There, the enemy tried to amass forces in the ruins of houses in order to later storm the positions of the defense forces. However, the Strix pilots thwarted these attempts. Ukrainian defenders destroyed Russian army soldiers along with their shelters. Near Ivanopilia, in the Konstantinovka direction, the Russians tried to break through Ukrainian battle lines. But the soldiers of the 28th Mechanized Brigade stopped their attack. This time, the enemy deployed their most heavily armored so-called Saray tanks and about 15 assault troops. Even as the Russian occupiers were approaching Ukrainian positions, they were met with heavy artillery fire. They stopped and destroyed the enemy's equipment and then neutralized the remaining personnel. and the fighters of the 81st Separate Airmobile Brigade destroyed an infantry fighting vehicle with troops near Serebrienka. The enemy tried to break through the kill zone in heavy armored vehicles along the southern outskirts of the settlement to reach Siversk. The Russian occupiers were detected and destroyed. Thus, drone operators are preventing the enemy from bringing resources into the city.
Apparently, the enemy forgot that the chances of survival for Russian armored vehicles in the kill zone are very low. Effective use of artillery, timely deployment of anti-tank and anti-personnel minefields. The enemy was reminded that all its attempts and intentions are futile and it can do nothing. Except for increasing its own casualty list, it is incapable of achieving anything on the battlefield. Basically, the number is quite telling. We're talking not only about destroyed enemy armored vehicles, but also about automotive equipment and buggies. First and foremost, we're talking about the huge number of Russian corpses. Who were Russians lost as a result of these local frontal assaults?
Forces of the 1st Corps of the Ukrainian National Guard Azov, along with adjacent units, managed to repel another mechanized assault by Russian occupation troops in the direction of Dobropilia. Several columns of various enemy vehicles, including heavy equipment, advanced for the attack. When they attempted to break through Ukrainian positions, they were destroyed. As a result, 6 tanks were eliminated. 9 IFVs and 5 APCs, and out of 11 motor vehicles and ATVs, 10 were destroyed. In the Konstantinovka direction, Russian occupiers attempted to advance near the settlements of Sherbinovka, Yablonovka, Rusin Yar, and towards Sofiivka. In the Alexandrovka direction, the enemy attacked in the areas of the settlements of Alexandrogorod, Sosnovka, Privolnoye, and Rybnoe. And in the hottest sector, the Pokrovsk direction, throughout the day, the Russians attempted to advance towards Ukrainian positions near the settlements of Nikonorovka, Rodinske, Kotlino, Udachne, Molodetske, and Mirnohrad. Ukraine's defense forces are organizing additional logistical routes to Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad to ensure uninterrupted supply of everything necessary to Ukrainian units, as well as timely evacuation. This was reported by the East Military Grouping. Ukrainian units continue active operations in the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration area. The enemy is suffering significant losses there. Over the past day, Russian occupiers lost 174 personnel in this direction. Of these, 132 are irrecoverable. 8 shelters housing Russian army personnel were also hit. The defense of Pokrovsk continues. Ukrainian forces control the northern part of the city. Search and assault operations and the elimination of enemy forces in the urban area are underway. In Mirnohrad, Ukrainian units are holding defensive lines and eliminating Russian invaders on the approaches to the city.
We often hear the phrase, the enemy is literally paving the way to these same coveted square kilometers of Ukrainian territory with the corpses of their own soldiers. Already now we can state the following quite literally. More than 450,000 Russian citizens who, through various recruitment campaigns, whether volunteer formations or conscription for contract military service, have ended up on the battlefield. In total, the number of Russians increased from the initial figure by about 75,000 over the course of this year, so 450 and 75. Accordingly, that's the difference. These are the Russian servicemen who have been killed or maimed, who have effectively remained on the battlefield for the sake of the geopolitical ambitions and dreams of the Kremlin dictator.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russia has lost more than 1,199,000 servicemen. Just in the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 1,420 occupiers, as well as destroying 2 aircraft, 8 tanks, 20 armored combat vehicles, 23 artillery systems, 1 multiple rocket launcher, and 113 units of enemy automotive equipment.
The Kremlin continues to replenish the ranks of its army, mainly at the expense of national minorities from the country's poorer regions, using financial incentives. These findings were published by British intelligence. At the same time, according to the report, residents of major cities have been virtually unaffected by mobilization. Also, less than 1% of Russian officials have relatives who have participated or are participating in the war against Ukraine. Analysts believe that the Russian leadership is prepared to continue to suffer colossal losses since the war against Ukraine is affecting mainly the less affluent sections of the population. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who headed the European Commission, spoke about strengthening Ukraine's position at the negotiating table and the resilience of Ursula von der Leyen. During the telephone conversation, the head of state noted that Ukraine appreciates the support of the European Union at this crucial diplomatic moment. According to him, peace talks are currently ongoing, which could radically change the situation, and it is important that pressure on Russia be maintained. Following meetings between the Ukrainian team and representatives of US President Donald Trump, draft versions of several documents were prepared. In particular, these concern security guarantees, the reconstruction of Ukraine, and the basic principles for ending the war. This was reported by President Volodymyr Zelensky. He listened to reports from delegation members Rustem Umerov and Andriy Natov on the results of the negotiations. Also, according to the president, the documents enshrine the necessity of preventing a third Russian invasion of Ukraine. Zelensky noted that every round of negotiations and meetings strengthens Ukraine's interests in achieving peace. Russia may be ready to attack NATO countries in the coming years, German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul is convinced. He added that this is precisely why there is no reason for Germany to reduce its defense efforts. At the same time, the head of the German Foreign Ministry stated that Europe's security is only possible if it is protected from Russia. He emphasized that this is one of the main reasons why Germany is interested in further supporting Ukraine. Tallinn will fund emergency repair work on Ukraine's energy system, said Estonia's Minister of Energy and Environment Andres Sutt. An additional €2 million will be allocated to the Energy Support Fund to cover the needs of Ukrainian energy companies, in particular for the purchase of spare parts, generators, and fuel. The ministry emphasized that this will help Ukraine cope with challenges, especially during the winter period. Progress has been made in negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine, but there is still no confidence in a peaceful settlement, said U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. Last week, meetings between American and Ukrainian delegations took place in the United States. Also in Florida, representatives of the U.S. president held consultations with Putin's special envoy. Victoria Chistyukina looked into what kind of progress Vance is talking about and whether Moscow is ready for real peace negotiations.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance announced a breakthrough in negotiations between the U.S. and Russia following consultations in Miami. According to him, the main achievement is that all key issues are now being discussed openly. Vance acknowledged that the main problem remains Moscow's territorial claims. In an interview with Unheard, he confirmed that Russia still seeks to gain control over the entire Donetsk region. Another serious issue that remains a subject of discussion is the control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is occupied by the Russian army. The parties are also discussing humanitarian issues, such as the rights of Ukrainians in territories captured by Russia.
We will continue to try to negotiate, and it seems to me we have made progress. But sitting here today, I cannot say with confidence that a peaceful solution will be reached. I believe there is a good chance that we will succeed. However, there is also a significant chance that we may fail. J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, in an interview with Unheard.
Meanwhile, Putin's aide Ushakov stated that most of the proposals formulated during the U.S.-Ukraine negotiations in Miami, Moscow, I quote, are categorically unacceptable. According to him, the proposals that Kyiv and Europe are trying to include in the peace plan allegedly hinder the achievement of a long-term peace. Moreover, the dictator's aide called the idea of a trilateral meeting between Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S. at the level of national security advisors unserious. If Putin rejects efforts to establish peace, Washington should sharply increase pressure on the Kremlin, and the U.S. president should provide Kyiv with Tomahawk cruise missiles. This opinion was expressed on NBC News by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham.
If Putin says no, then this time I hope President Trump will do the following. He will sign my bill, recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism for abducting 20,000 Ukrainian children. And more importantly, he will detain ships transporting sanctioned Russian oil, just as is done with Venezuela. If Putin says no, we need to fundamentally change the rules of the game, including providing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine so it can strike missile and drone factories in Russia. In that case, I would go all in.
Over the course of 3 days, from December 19th to 21st, the Ukrainian team held a series of meetings with American partners in Florida. The head of the Ukrainian delegation, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, described the negotiations with the American side in Miami as constructive.
The main focus was on 4 key documents: continuing work on the 20-point plan, coordinating positions on the multilateral framework agreement on security guarantees, coordinating positions on the bilateral security guarantees agreement with the United States, as well as continuing work on the economic development plan, the Prosperity Plan. Special attention was given to discussing the timeline and sequence of further steps. Ukraine remains fully committed to achieving a just and lasting peace. Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Peace cannot be achieved at any cost, stated Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Reliable security guarantees are extremely important so that the aggressor does not even consider invading Ukraine with war again, the head of state emphasized. For now, it is too early to say that a peace agreement is ready. There is no agreement.
As of today, an agreement exists when it is not just on paper, when it is signed by leaders, and when the war is stopped. That is what it means to have an agreement. Because the Budapest Memorandum, I do not consider that to have been an agreement. I believe it was just a piece of paper.
Volodymyr Zelensky noted the constructive nature of the negotiations in Florida. During his conversation with the Prime Minister of Norway, he emphasized that the Ukrainian team continues to work with both American and European partners. But much depends on whether Russia will truly feel the need to end the war. This should not be a rhetorical or political game on Moscow's part, the president of Ukraine stressed. So far, only negative signals are coming from the Kremlin. The aggressor country continues its assaults on the front and its shelling of peaceful cities. Victoria Chastyukina for Freedom TV channel.
Poland is installing a drone countermeasure system on the border with Belarus. According to the country's Minister of Internal Affairs, Marcin Kierwiński, a radar has been installed on a watchtower over 70 meters high, and it will start operating in January. This is the first element of the radar system. There will be 4 more. A representative of the Ministry of Internal Affairs also stated that the system will detect approaching objects and, if necessary, neutralize drones. Lithuania will purchase anti-tank munitions from Sweden worth more than 150 million euros. Lithuania's Defense Resources Agency has signed a contract with one of the Swedish manufacturers. According to the document, 84mm caliber grenade launcher rounds as well as single-use grenade launchers will be purchased. The Lithuanian Ministry of Defense stated that the acquired munitions will significantly enhance the army's capabilities, in particular when it comes to destroying armored vehicles and fortified positions. The ministry noted that the purpose of the purchase is to strengthen the country's defense potential.
In November, Russia sold a record amount of gold to China. Beijing purchased gold bullion worth $961 million, according to Russian media citing data from China's customs service. For comparison, the peak value of deliveries in 2024 was $223 million, which is almost 4.5 times less. According to Bloomberg, Russian exports of precious metals to China nearly doubled in the first half of this year, reaching $1 billion. Experts claim that Russia is selling off its last reserves to finance the war against Ukraine. More details in the following report.
China is increasing its purchases of liquefied natural gas from Russia. In November, the aggressor country sold China more than 1.5 million tons of LNG. For comparison, in November 2024, this volume was half as much. As a result, Russia became the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas to China after Qatar. However, to achieve this, they had to significantly lower prices. Russian LNG is the cheapest on the market. That is to say,
the Russian economy is totally dependent on China, not only in terms of imports from China, but also in terms of making money by reselling various energy resources through China or by selling energy resources directly to China. Because right now, Russia's markets are practically not diversified when it comes to key sectors such as pipeline gas. And that's it.
Record levels have been reached not only in Russian energy exports to China. In November 2025, Moscow sold gold to Beijing worth $961 million. This was reported by Russian media, citing data from China's customs service. Since the beginning of the year, the aggressor country has exported gold to China worth $1.9 billion. Beijing is taking advantage of the situation and buying up resources at bargain prices, and Moscow is willing to sell off its last reserves in order to continue the war against Ukraine, experts explain.
The majority of gold and foreign exchange reserves in any country are made up of currencies. Currencies of different countries, hard currencies, these are bonds of reliable countries and shares of major global companies. And only after that, as a last resort, come precious metals including gold. So if Russia is already selling gold, this is the most objective indicator that the rest, meaning stocks, bonds, and liquid cash currencies, Russia practically has no hard currencies or gold and foreign exchange reserves left.
Every year, Russia increases its spending on the military and security sector. In 2026, they plan to allocate almost 17 trillion rubles for it. However, even the record-high military budgets of modern Russia, comparable to those of the USSR, are not enough. In 2025, the Kremlin spent 20% more on these purposes than it had planned, according to calculations by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
According to estimates by the Russian Ministry of Defense, the UN codes will reach 15 trillion 900 billion rubles, $198 billion 800 million, or 7.3% of GDP. This is 2 trillion 400 billion rubles more than what was allocated in the budget. On average, the state spends 213 billion rubles per week on the war, or $2 billion 700 million. This amount could serve as the annual budget for a large Russian region. From a statement by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on Telegram.
The year 2025, two-thirds of Russian regions end up with a budget deficit. According to data from the Federal Service for Labor and Employment, wage arrears in the country amounted to 2 billion over the first 10 months of 2025, 200 million rubles. At the traditional year-end press conference, Putin acknowledged the economic slowdown but called it, I quote, a deliberate action by the government and the central bank. The dictator promised Russians a wage increase and gave a rather optimistic assessment of the federal budget.
These economic problems keep popping up one after another, and that's why there's a disconnect. On one hand, there are Putin's and the Russian leadership's public statements, and on the other, there are bloggers and, let's say, industrialists who analyze the economy, who don't get involved in politics, let me emphasize that, and who say that everything in the country is terrible. Accordingly, these problems aren't going anywhere. And that's why, while traditionally people look forward to the new year as something good and kind, in Russia it's awaited as the time after which taxes and fees will go up, and as a result, people will have less money.
The Kremlin is trying to balance the expenditure and revenue sides of the budget through new duties and levies. Starting January 1st, the value-added tax will increase from 20% to 22%. Economists say the market will immediately react to the increase in the base VAT rate. Prices for food and consumer goods will inevitably rise. Utility tariffs will also go up. Starting January 1st, 2026, they will increase by 1.7% for all Russians. And from October 1st, they will be raised further in different regions, ranging from 8 to 22%. Moreover, the increase will be minimal in the capital, 8%, and in Zabekalski Krai, for example, 23%.